Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 377 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Airan, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our third book is called From Letters to Leaders, Leveraging Your Fraternity or Sorority Experience in Order to Land Your Dream Job. That is on Amazon. Go and pick up that book today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, ethics was my favorite class in grad school, mostly because it gave me the opportunity to write extensively about the intersection of ethics and the companies that I've worked for over my entire career. And if you've never thought about it from that perspective, from that lens, I would encourage you to write, because I think that process can be very healing, especially since we so often see a mismatch between the stated values of an organization and the way that today's leaders in that organization, maybe they don't exemplify those values all the time. And speaking of ethics and leadership, we have a fantastic speaker with us here today that I know you are going to absolutely love. Rashmi Airan is a keynote speaker and a consultant determined to create organizational cultures focused on integrity, authenticity, and accountability. Rashmi instills audiences with the energy and understanding to create the safe space that will allow us to engage in courageous conversations in all aspects of our lives. She will create a strategy for any organization to address reputational risk issues as they arise, and Rashmi utilizes her own experiences to share her human performance methodology, technique, and mindset that will catalyze leadership, growth, and stability in all organizations. Welcome to the show, Rashmi.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here, Michael.
Oh, I am so excited for this conversation. I know that you have been doing incredible work speaking on stages all across North America. So to have you on the show is just a huge honor. I love your TEDx talk. But, to go to the beginning, let's just start kind of with your UNC experience, because you're a first generation immigrant of Indian parents who had some extremely high expectations for you. And you decided on the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for your undergraduate experience. So tell our audience, why did you decide that Chapel Hill was the right place for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I remember it's funny because my son just graduated high school. We just went through the entire college process with him. And he literally just asked me a few weeks ago, and he had never asked me, so I never offered up the information. But he was like, so Mom, how many schools did you get into? Right? Because this entire process has been pretty excruciating. I was like, a lot. And so I started going through the list, and typical, I think, Indian families, I was always encouraged to apply to the top schools, which I did. And then I ended up, I would say I applied to all of the top schools except Michigan and Chicago, because they were just way too cold. And I'm a Miami girl, so I was not going there. But I applied kind of across the board. As it turns out, UNC Chapel Hill is my father, when he first came from India in 1967, he actually came and got his master's in public health there. So of course it was on my list. He had gone from there to NC State, which is where I was born. But so it was always on my list, and my godmother lives there. So I kind of had this affinity, but honestly, I had never visited. So when I got into 12 schools, I went and visited all of them. And some of them honestly were technically ranked higher. Some of them were Ivies. But as I walked onto Carolina's campus, it was just this is it. This is my happy place. And to this day, I still call Chapel Hill my happy place. In fact, I was just there last week. My daughter was there for a volleyball camp, and I can just walk the campus and be so at peace. I found a way to get 5 miles in just running in and out of campus last week, just because it's just a beautiful mixture, I think, of diversity, really interesting combination and opportunities for all levels of classes. Of course, it's a big sports school, and I'm a big sports fan. It offered the Greek life, but it also offered me an opportunity to get involved. I was very heavily involved in student government. So, and because I'm a Miami girl, I like that it had seasons, but it wasn't excruciating and extreme seasons. So that for me was a huge plus.
I love it. Makes total sense. And yeah, you definitely got your fill of athletics on that campus. There's no question.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very big. All right. And, speaking of fraternity and sorority, you joined Chi Omega there. So what was special about this particular sorority that made you want to join over the other organizations?
Yeah. So first of all, just the fact that I'm an Indian girl trying to go pledge a sorority was kind of a big deal. I had to I remember convince my parents, explain to them what it was. They had this very other idea of what being in Greek life meant, and it wasn't a positive perspective. So I really wanted to change that for them. And as I began to go through the process, Carolina, as you probably know, Mike, is like 80%, 82% individuals from within the state of North Carolina. And as an out-of-stater from Florida, I didn't know a soul when I got to Carolina, versus all these other people that are Carolina that like half their schools, high schools, are at the same college. So it was important for me to be with like-minded people. And so I sort of intentionally chose CHIO because it was, in my perspective, a very interesting mixture of probably 75% of the women were from out of state, but there was still a little bit of a healthy mix of people from in-state. So we got a little bit of that Carolina blood within. And that was a big part of it. It was also really fun group of girls, super outgoing group of girls, and all interested and involved in lots of different aspects of our community life at Carolina, which I thought was also very important. We had a beautiful house, and we had lots of really fun parties. So yeah, it was a great choice. I would say that my CHIO experience was unusual, and I think everyone takes from it what they want to get from Greek life. For me, being in a sorority meant that it gave me an incredible social network and group of friends and people that I could rely on. And some of my best friends from my college days were CHIOs with me, either my year or the year above. And obviously, it gave me a place to go have lunches and meals, and we had lots of great parties and formals and mixers and interaction with fraternities. But I never lived in the house, even though we had this incredible house. It was not. I was very involved at Carolina's campus in other ways, and we can talk about that in a little bit. And so I was probably not like the most involved Greek sorority person, but it was a huge part of my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't the only part of my life, but it was a part of my life.
Yeah, you were very involved on campus. There's no question about that. And it's funny that you mentioned your parents not really understanding what that process is like. As the son of two Israeli parents, I totally get it. It's not
Yeah.
something that they grew up with, and they just
Yeah.
had no understanding of what that community is all about, what they do.
Yeah.
And you're right, they probably have a lot of negative perceptions about what Greek life really is all about. So I think explaining that to them and reassuring them that I was going to do something good with this experience, I think was critical.
Yeah.
And so, the other thing is, you ended up going to law school at Columbia, and you ended up launching this independent law practice in Miami. And what happened to you is just really fascinating, because at that point we have a housing boom. You're recruited to work with a local real estate developer who later engaged in some really questionable business practices. So I guess I'm wondering, and I think this is going to be helpful for our college students that are just about to enter into the workforce. Why didn't you listen to your inner voice that was screaming, hey, ask some questions about what's going on here?
So, it's interesting because I think listening to our inner voice, trusting our instincts, we know that we're supposed to do that, right? Our parents teach us, our coaches, our teachers, everyone, like innately, we know we're supposed to do that. But what happens is we get stressors, influences, pressures from outside of us that we are all subjected to at any moment on any given day in any aspect of our lives. And the trick is that rather than suppress the inner voice, ignore the inner voice, telling the inner voice to shut up, which is what I was doing. And there's a lot of research that I've done around behavioral ethics and organizational psychology, and also biases that we all have that allow us to shut those voices down. But instead of shutting them down, if we can actually learn to listen and reflect and actually then thoughtfully decide what to do, that's actually where the power is. I know in my case, I intentionally avoided any sort of negative, yucky feeling that I felt within because I wanted to work with this client so badly. And I was so focused on the outcome, which is in my research, it's called outcome bias. Like I didn't want to lose. First of all, I wanted to get the client, right? I was hungry for that client, but then I didn't want to lose the client and I wanted to keep him happy. And so then I kept sort of going down this slippery slope, even though my gut was saying, hey, like, what are you doing, man? Like, hey, that doesn't feel right. Or, I'm getting screamed at by my client. And instead of being like, why is he screaming at me? I'm an attorney. I do not deserve to be screamed at. Let me look into this. Instead, I was like, oh, let me just keep making sure he's happy. Because I think it's very easy to get caught up in this desire to keep up with the Joneses, make money, live in a house, specific type of house, send your kids to a specific type of school, drive a particular type of car, right? Like society puts a lot of pressure, or we allow ourselves to be subjected to that pressure, and it's not healthy, but it happens. And so my entire mission is for all of us to continue to realize that every single decision we make matters. And when we hold ourselves accountable to every decision that we make, it allows us to obviously make better decisions, but ultimately be better givers to our communities, to our families, to our organizations. And, it applies on college campuses. It applies in a professional setting. It applies in our families, in our communities.
It definitely applies on college campuses. As you describe what you were going through, and you talked about that end goal, it just kind of reminds me of the end goal of, joining a popular fraternity on campus, and you're on this slippery slope where, there are things that are going on within that organization, let's call it hazing. And it's this slippery slope. It starts with something, really benign, and then just slowly moves as we get closer and closer to initiation to things that we know aren't right and aren't in line with the values of the organization. But yet we're so focused on getting in and joining, and the need to belong is so great when you're on a college campus as a freshman, just like you said, not really knowing anybody else on campus, that you're willing to overlook all of these things that aren't right.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what happens in a particular setting that's very isolated in a particular way, when you're on a college campus, and there is this desperate need and desire to feel like you belong, to feel like you have a community of people, and you're young, you're coming in as a freshman, and you've got these seniors and juniors that have been there longer, and there's a natural inclination to think and convince yourself, really rationalize and justify the actions that you're being asked to do, that you're watching people do. And rather than, if your inner voice is saying, hey, that doesn't really quite feel right, or we probably should not be having this guy do that or this girl do that, the natural tendency is to shut that voice up and not speak up. Because one, you don't want to be singled out. Two, you're trying to fit in and you want everybody to be your friend. And three, there's this idea of attributing trust, right? So we tend to attribute trust to people that are older than us, that we think are more educated than us, that have been doing this longer. And so it's very easy for, a vulnerable freshman who doesn't necessarily think they're vulnerable, but that's really what they are, to attribute trust to somebody who's a senior who says, but this is just how it's done. Oh, by the way, this is tradition. This is our tradition. What, you're going to challenge us on this? And so that, to have the courage to speak up in the wake of that is really hard. And I think the more we have these difficult conversations and empower ourselves and each other to listen to our voice, right? Listen to what our gut's telling us. Because if our gut's telling us something, the chances are we need to listen and at least heed and reflect a little bit on what it's telling us.
Yeah, see, that's the program right there. It's the intersection of ethics and fraternity and sorority life. I think that, and then you could go on for days about that. And, speaking about your case in particular, I mean, let's talk about it. Your involvement resulted in a 6-month sentence to federal prison for bank fraud, alongside a multi-million-dollar judgment against your future earnings, community service hours, and 3 years supervised release. And what's interesting too is that your family and your friends really supported you throughout this process. So how did this whole incident and how it was handled in terms of their view of you regarding the judgment, how did that change your view of all of these strong relationships that you had?
I will tell you that I feel very blessed that I'm in a place and I'm in a situation in my life where I have been honored to be eulogized before I died. And I say that because not many of us get this opportunity. But when I was sentenced, the judge was provided like almost 200 letters of support. And I actively, individually called each person that wrote me a letter and told them what I did, owned it, took accountability for it. And to give you some context, Mike, I'm really involved in my community. I apologize. There's lightning going on in Miami right now. So if you hear lightning, yeah, and thunder. So I sit on a lot of boards. I'm very politically active. I know all the managing partners of, the firms. I'm, the mayors, the politicians. Like, I'm very involved, and I'm grateful that I've been able to be to give back to my community. But because of that, when I was going through my case for bank fraud, and I had gotten indicted, I had decided to plea, and I decided to really own what I knew and take ownership of that. I knew that I didn't want anybody to read about it. I didn't want anybody to gossip about it. It was really important that people heard it from me. And I'm going to be honest with you, when I walked into this and started to make these calls, and by the way, I'm a super anal person. Anybody that knows me from my Carolina days knows I'm super anal. So I made a spreadsheet of everybody that I know. And we're talking people from my Carolina days that I hadn't honestly talked to in like 20 years, to my elementary school friends that I hadn't talked to, and some that I had, and people from all walks of my life that knew me at my core, like knew my character, my personality, who I was as a human being. That was really important to me, to make sure the judge in my case had got to see that side of me, and not just me with this one bad action that I did and this, name on pleading. So I began to call people one by one. And as I began to make these calls, I will tell you that I walked into this really expecting people to shun me, and that they wouldn't talk to me anymore, and that I was a disgrace. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned from this is that people are very forgiving of our humanity. If we stand up in the wake of something we've done, whether it's a thought, a behavior, an action, and own what we've done, and commit to being better, to grow and learn, and now give back, which is what I try to do with my speaking, I have found, through the grace of the universe and God, that people actually respect me more for having owned it and asked for help. And I didn't mitigate, right? I really looked that dragon in the eye, and I was really truthful and vulnerable with on every call. Imagine I made over 200 calls, which did not happen overnight. It was like I could only do 5 calls a day. I had not even been sentenced yet. I was scared out of my mind. I would cry on every call. It was very emotional for me, and that process was very healing for me. I think we all go through life, and certainly as college students, there's this propensity to believe that we have to pretend that everything is okay, or that we are all perfect, or that we cannot make any mistakes because failure is bad, right? And if you make a mistake, you have to pretend like it didn't happen, or you have to definitely make sure nobody finds out about it. And I'm here to say that that's actually the opposite of what I have experienced. I have experienced that me facing my shame in front of others publicly has garnered me more respect and love and belief from others. And my reputation has stayed intact. And that's why the judge got almost 200 letters of support of people that just shared stories of how I had inspired them, things that I had done for them over the course of their life. And I don't think there's anything special about me except that I owned it.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge believer that taking accountability is what makes us a good leader. It's what makes us good humans. And it gives us a lot of power in a way that I never thought possible, right? Like, what vulnerability to me was like a massive sign of weakness as a kid. I was never asking for help. I had to know it all. Somehow attorneys are supposed to know it all. So I think people also expected me to know it all. And over time, I've learned that it's such a gift when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, and it's very freeing in a very, really transformative way.
Yeah. You definitely see that vulnerability on the TEDx stage in your TEDx talk, for sure. I wanted to talk a little bit about accountability, because I think for the listeners right now, the college students, it's just really difficult to get accountability in their fraternity or sorority chapter, especially for brand new leaders. So how can we hold our members accountable to actually doing what we say we're going to do in fraternity and sorority, instead of it all just being some words that we say at the beginning of each meeting?
Yeah. So I really believe that accountability starts from within. So it has to be role models by leadership, 100%. And that means the leaders have to come forward and say, hey, we're not doing this right. I'm not doing this right. I'm not doing this. This is what I can do better. I think it takes constant conversation. It absolutely involves and requires an alignment of core values. So I think the trick is that every fraternity and sorority, might have a poster or like a list. Hey, these are our core values. But we as individuals have our own set of core values. And I do actually a lot of work around this with universities when I'm on campuses on, hey, what are our individual core values? Because oftentimes we don't make the time to dig deep and figure that out for ourselves. And there's an exercise that I do and a process to figure that out. And once you figure out what your core values are, then you make sure you're in alignment with the sorority or fraternity that you're in. And then you can find a way to make sure that you're not only holding yourself accountable, but holding others accountable. I think there's a way to have accountability partners within organizations, within fraternities and sororities. And I do, actually, it's something that I create when I'm at organizations and I do leadership workshops. We do a whole accountability workshop and like, there's a series of questions you could ask, and it kind of gets people aligned in terms of being, holding each other accountable. And I think at the sorority and fraternity level, there's an opportunity really for individual leaders within these organizations to step up and be that role model. And that's the trick. It's really hopefully motivating and giving people the opportunity to be that person that's going to lead them and like to another and propel them in a huge way.
I love that. That's definitely program number 2, accountability and living our core values, right?
Yeah.
That's just fantastic. And, you keep talking about this safe space for students, for employees. Many fraternities and sororities don't have the safe space to have these kind of courageous conversations on an ongoing basis. And I will say this, as a male, I mean, it is really difficult for men to be vulnerable like you're suggesting. So how should they start to create these vulnerable conversations?
I love that question. And I'm going to say that I think my superpower is that I create vulnerability. I think because I'm so open about my story and I'm so vulnerable, when I enter a room and I have spent 20, 30 minutes with an entity or a group of people or an organization, because I've been so raw, all of a sudden people open up in a way that blows my mind usually. I think that any sorority or fraternity that says, hey, we don't have a safe space here, just means that they haven't tried. And there's absolutely a way to create it. You have to commit to doing it. And it takes a lot of courage, no doubt. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's really hard. But again, it does start with leadership. And if there's a, whatever, it's not just the student leadership, right? It's also whoever the faculty leadership is. It really is a full-blown alignment and commitment from everybody involved to allow people to come forward if they've done something and have real conversations about it. Give each other the grace to forgive, because forgiveness is a huge part of this. Because it's not only like, hey, let's talk about what we've done wrong. It's we have to have the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to forgive that. What can we do better? How are we going to redeem ourselves? Because that's part of the process in accountability, because we're not expecting perfection. That's not the point of this. We are expecting a commitment to accountability, which means the expectation that there is imperfection for every one of us. And once we have that understanding about each of us and our organization, that allows everybody to have that safe space and conversation, because everybody knows they're walking into a space of imperfection. I tell my kids, I am the perfectly imperfect mom, because that's my lesson that I've learned from this, right?
Yeah, that vulnerability, it's what actually bonds, let's say fraternity and sorority leaders together, is that vulnerability. And that's what I really want to impress on the students who are listening right now. If your rush videos are all about, you're in Miami, a speedboat in Miami, and that's the rush video, I would tell you that that's probably not real. You're probably not doing that in your sorority every single day. But if you are vulnerable to these potential new members and you encourage that, and the leaders are actually modeling the way in terms of that vulnerability, I think you can really get some deep connections with all the potential new members that are walking into that scenario because of that shared vulnerability and just being transparent and real. If you can do that, you will get the connections that you want. If you're trying to be something that you're not, and that's what you're portraying, I think you're going to have a difficult time connecting. That's just
Yeah. And,
amazing.
I think, look, like I said, vulnerability gets us bad rap.
Yeah.
Um, and even though Brene Brown and lots of people have been talking about it, Brene Brown's like my hero, by the way.
Oh,
Hopefully one day I get to meet her. But I do believe that men, and I say this because I have watched my father learn from me.
mhm.
And my dad just turned 77, and it was really hard for him when I was going, as I began to go through this process. And the more he's heard me speak and the more, he has watched me do what I do, it's been actually really incredible to watch my father, who's, grew up in India, very typical, like, no, we have to hold it all in, to start to, allow himself to be vulnerable, to talk about those hard things, whether it's with my mom, whether it's with me. He's writing a book now on how to be a better husband, right? Like, so this is how vulnerable he has become. So it is definitely something that can be learned. I don't think we're hardwired. I don't think any of us are hardwired to be one way or the other. And once we make a decision that we want to be vulnerable, that we know that this is where we want to go to, it's just a matter of allowing ourselves to open up and going through that process. And, I'm lucky enough, I think, that however you want to, I don't like to offend people, but whether it's God, universe, whatever you believe, has given me the courage to really be open and vulnerable about my story. So I live in that space every moment of my life at this point, on stages, big and small. So but I never take for granted how hard it is, because I still have to get up on stage or get up in a group, in a room of people, or just at the person sitting next to me, on an airline, which on my flight, which I do all the time, because people always ask me what I speak about. And inevitably I share my story and my kids like roll their eyes, right? But like, I live in that space, but it's not easy. It's every single day. I still have to get up and remind myself I'm a convicted felon. And every single day I say, okay, but I'm going to talk about it because that helps others. So, there's a lot of like things in our head and in our psyche that we have to overcome in order to get here. But once you get there, that process, that freedom is just incredible.
Yeah. There's so many lessons to learn from, what you've been through. And I think about the adversity that the students are going through, and how you react to that adversity, I think is the difference between those who are successful ultimately in life and those who aren't. And so I guess if you had to summarize, what's your secret sauce to always climbing rather than collapsing once we inevitably hit that obstacle?
I will tell you that, first of all, it's a choice. We all have a choice in every moment. And for me, it started because I did not want my children to see me on my knees, figuratively, right? It was very important for me to role model resilience to my children. And I don't use that word lightly. I know it's kind of overused right now, that word, and grit, which I definitely have, tenacity, all of that. But I do believe that the way we overcome these moments in our lives, which, by the way, we will all have them. And, many of these students who are in college may or may not, right? My children have both gone through a lot of adversity by the time they were getting to college, but others don't. We all have a moment in our lives, and sometimes several, where we have to overcome something, a health challenge, a financial challenge. For me, it was legal and financial, but I'm also divorced, right? So I've also gone through family issues. And so we all go through some sort of challenge in our lives. And I believe it's who we surround ourselves with. So I call it my constellation of stars. The relationships in our lives matter. And I am very intentional about who I have chosen to be within my inner circle. And I'm lucky enough to have incredible friends and family, but also a larger outer circle, also people that believe in me. So it's the constellation of stars around you. It's your spiritual, emotional, mental mindset. Because like I said, this is not easy. It's a constant, ongoing conversation I'm having with myself, reminding myself that I'm not going to be defined by what I did. I mean, it doesn't define me. I'm still a really good person. I can still do a lot of really good things, and I'm going to do that, right? So it's self-care. I work out every single day. I pray. I meditate. It's a big part of my life, and I truly believe that that's part of the healing for me and has helped me overcome. And it's also just the courage and the tenacity to know that I have so much I can give, and I'm such a good person, and I have so much I can still offer others through my story. And so that's what's helped me overcome. I don't know if we call it secret sauce, but it's certainly how I've done it. It's a combination of friends and family and my own sort of ongoing regular decisions to just keep moving forward. And I'm not going to say that I haven't had those moments of crying and fear and sadness. Of course, it's completely normal, but I get past it by just like that decision. Okay, I'm going to get past it now. I'm going to move forward.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to talk to you about one more thing, which is empathy. It's something that I think we don't see enough of in today's society, on college campuses. Recently, Northwestern was hit with a major athletics hazing scandal with the football team. And you talk about improving culture in athletics through empathy. And this definitely applies to fraternities and sororities when we talk about hazing, for example, where mental and physical abuse is against the values of the university. It's against the core values of your fraternity and sorority. So how do we become more aware and practice empathy on a regular basis to ensure that these types of things don't happen on college campuses?
I will start off by telling you that the reporter at Northwestern that broke the story happens to be the daughter of my criminal defense attorney in Miami.
Wow,
Her name is Nicole Marcus. So she was being interviewed by CNN and ESPN. I was so proud of her. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, the way it came to her was really, through a lot of intentional reporting and digging. Look, I think that empathy is something that, again, is a commitment. But I do believe it starts with us sharing our stories. So, for example, because I share my story, people are automatically empathetic towards me because I have now opened up, right? I have become so vulnerable and raw that people automatically want to empathize with me. And, hopefully most people can't empathize with my prison experience, but they can empathize with having done something wrong, feeling like I disgraced my family, having lost everything, my money, my bar license, like my freedom, obviously. So people can empathize with aspects of my story. And I really, truly believe, and that's the power of my story, which is, I know why when I share on stages, people listen and they remember my story, right? I get emails years later from people that say, hey, this happened today. And because I remembered your cautionary tale, I didn't do something because I remembered your story. So the power of stories cannot be underestimated. And the more we share our own individual experiences and stories, which is basically being vulnerable, that creates empathy. And empathy creates trust. And trust creates healthy, better, long-term sustainable organizations that are doing what they're meant to do, right? Not just like living through and like constantly putting out fires. Mm-hmm. And I know on sorority campuses or Greek organizations on campuses, there's such a great opportunity to give service and to do things for our individual campuses. And if we can create those organizations that are fostered with this healthy sense of understanding and empathy and vulnerability and conversations, courageous conversations, imagine the impact that we could have in our communities and individual campuses, because there's such a great alignment, right? Like it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I agree completely. And that's why I'm in it. That's exactly why I'm in it. All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I was recently in Miami with my family. We had dinner on the water and it was the most exquisite experience. And now my daughter's like addicted in Miami life and she can't wait to go back. So
where did you go? Where did you go?
Oh my gosh. So it was, it's like this really like boutique-ish hotel that's like right on the water. And then they have a restaurant that's adjoining. It's man, oh man.
Now the Standard?
I think it might have been. Yeah, I think it was the Standard, I think.
Yeah,
so it was
it's like an off the beaten path.
Yes, yes.
And it's not on South Beach, it's on Venetian Causeway, right. Which is like
that's the spot. Yeah, so we went there, we had a fantastic dinner, and now my daughter's like, how come we haven't gone to Miami more often? I'm like, okay.
How old is she?
So she's 16, but she's a year ahead academically. So she's actually a senior in high school this fall. And
they made you better.
Yeah, and of course she wants to go to your alma mater, Columbia. That's her spot. That's her jam. Her
Amazing.
dream school.
Amazing.
So yeah, so she's got really good taste. So the next time I'm in Miami, I've already been to the Standard. I mean, are there other restaurants that you recommend for her?
Oh my gosh. Well, look, my favorite cuisine is Japanese Asian. I mean, I'm lucky that I get Indian food at home. So, right. So, if that wasn't the case, of course, I'd want to go eat Indian food.
Uh-huh.
But there are some incredible new omakase restaurants. And so last week was my birthday. And my friends all took me to this new omakase restaurant in Coconut Grove called Omakai. Really good. One of my favorites is Uchi. The original Uchi is actually in Austin, Texas, and they opened one now in Wynwood, which I love. Uchi's amazing.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, those are like fine Asian restaurants. There's this actually super cool bodega that has a speakeasy in the back, and it's in Miami Beach, and I'll have to send you the list, but so this bodega is basically like it's almost like one of those what are those calls, like those silver airstreamers, like, so what are those things called? The silver,
it's like an airstream. Yeah, it's an airstream.
Airstream. Okay, so it's an airstream, but it's like on the side of a building, right? You walk up, it's basically counter, like, walk up to the counter, you order what you want to order, and it's not like tacos, burritos, whatever, it's Mexican. And in the back is, there's the kitchen. And then if you didn't even know any better, you would just sit on the tables outside. If you're in the know, you know that if you walked through this fake bathroom area, right? With like on one area there's like a fake bathroom where there's like a sink, and then another area there's a old payphone, and you walk through the back and there's this incredible speakeasy, and it's like you walk in and there's this amazing lounge with this fantastic bar, DJ spins, most nights. It's super, super fun. So that's like a super fun date night place. Your 16-year-old would love it. My kids love it. It's like a little hidden gem in South Beach. There's a couple of those, but that's like one of my favorite little spots now.
I love it. You're going to have to send me the list, because we'll end up back in Miami real soon, I'm sure, if my daughter has anything to do with it. And we have the same taste in food. We love great Indian food and high-end Asian. So there you go.
Awesome.
Like, we'll eat for days. All right. So if our student listeners, if they want to bring you in to speak on their college campus, where should they go to connect with you?
Yeah, so I mean, the easiest place is to send me an email, which is RASHMI. So it's Rashmi, RASHMI and then my name, RashmiAiran.com. So it's RASHMIAIRAN.com. Feel free to give me a call. It's 305-772-8712. I'm a one woman show. So you feel free to reach out to me by email, by phone call. Happy to share more if you guys would like.
Well, that's fantastic. I think you're going to get a lot of phone calls and emails now about speaking on college campuses. So this will be a lot of fun, I'm sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Rashmi. I mean, it's really brave that you're doing so. And I think it's such a needed conversation right now for college students that are just about to enter the workforce. So it's a critical conversation. Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me. Have an awesome day.
Yes, my pleasure. And to our listeners, if you like this talk with Rashmi, make sure you like it on social media. Make sure you share it with other college students. And we will see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.